Had I stopped it? Ah, thank you for letting me know. All right, sorry about that. Sorry, I didn't, I hadn't, I remembered that I had put it on pause, but because I had gone online much earlier and I didn't want it just to be recording nothing. All right, so I think now we're okay. All right, thank you for bringing that to my attention. All right, so uh, let me come back to my point. Next week, I'll be going over reviewing, and let me take the second question then that I will be also reviewing. And let me, before I say that, because what I was going to say, and then I we had to deal with the recording. It is an open book midterm test. All right, so that means that there is no restriction, no restriction on what you will be able to have available in front of you. If you can have your materials printed out hard copy, or you can have it on another computer, or however, you can feel free to be Googling, going on the internet. The one thing that I don't want you to do is I don't want you to be sort of discussing and working out an essay with someone else. It must be your own work. And therefore, I would not accept essays that are just basically copies of other people's work, all right, in the sense that it should be your own, all right? So there should be no sort of, uh, no group work. In other words, this is an individual work, but it is open book, and you are available to you are the resources from the lecture. And even if you wish to go online and be searching for something, you will have the 3 hours to do it. All right. I won't be lecturing in week 8. You will have the test will be available from 12 o'clock, our usual starting time, until 3 o'clock, and you will have to submit at 3 o'clock. Okay, so that is how the test will be conducted. All right, so I think let's go on to question 2. Ruqayya Hassan believes that verbal art has a deeper meaning. This deeper meaning represents a hypothesis about some aspect of the life of social man. She explains how this deeper meaning is conveyed through a process which she calls symbolic articulation, using an example of verbal art discussed in class. Now this, it must be, in other words, an example. In this case, be careful of that. It would have to have been an example discussed in class, whether a poem or drama. Explain how the poet or dramatist uses symbolic articulation to convey their hypothesis about some aspect of the life of social man. All right, so this was the second question. Again, I'm not explaining today. I'll do that next week when I'll sort of be putting it in the context of an overall review. Third question, some believe that our metaphor making ability is what makes our species unique when compared with other primates. Both the noted psychiatrist Russell Mears and the linguist M.A.K. Halliday have identified several stages in human development leading up to our ability to metaphorize. Why is this ability to metaphorize considered a defining characteristic for our own humanness? Compare Mears and Halliday's approaches to explaining our metaphor-making ability. Show how their approaches to metaphorization are different, how their approaches are similar. All right, so again, to make the point, there will be 3 questions, not these 3 questions. But of course, the course content that this midterm was based on is the same content that you have been receiving over the past few weeks as well. So it will be related, definitely. And I will discuss next week as a review in preparation for week 8. All right. Before I proceed, are there any questions that come to mind that you would like to ask? Either you could, if you put them on the chat, I probably will be replying to you during the break. All right. But if there's anything pressing and you're online, if you'd like to, you can unmute yourself and ask. Is there anything before I proceed, or are we pretty clear? Okay, I don't hear anything. I hope my speaker is working, but I believe it is. And in any case, let's continue then. Okay. I'm going to be talking today, as I said, going back to the idea of what's sort of the approach that we're taking. And right away from the first week on, we mentioned we're taking a linguistic approach. It's the discipline of linguistics, which is more or less providing the basis for which we are looking at language in art, invention, and inspiration. Now, I mentioned to you before that the approach that I am taking here is very much based on the approach of the linguist M.A.K. Halliday. Another linguist who is, we might say, presents a different alternative view to Halliday's is Noam Chomsky. How are they different? If we take the approach that Chomsky takes. Now, Chomsky believes that our ability to use language is innate. You're born with it. And what's there at birth is a knowledge. He calls it competence that is logically well ordered. It's logical. And therefore it can be explained in very logical terms. When it comes to the fact that when we use language, it doesn't seem to be all that well ordered and logical, he explains that fuzziness and indeterminacy which we observe in actual usage. And he says it's the result of performance constraints. You are misspeaking, perhaps memory is an issue, or you are distracted, other reasons. So this is only in a way polluting the way that you speak in such that it doesn't really show us what is that competence that you have. So a distinction was made between performance and competence. Competence, logically well ordered. Performance, typically consisting of some irregularities. Now, Halliday takes a different point of view. What he's saying is this, and that the way that we construe the world, the way that we relate to other people, how we enact social relationships, the complexity of that is the reason why language is fuzzy. There's the way that how we see the world, how we perceive the world, how we engage with one another. What we discover is that language is inherently fuzzy, and largely due to the complexity of what it is that we are experiencing. The difference that we see between Halliday and Chomsky is that our focus here is not so much on trying to explain an innate competence. We're not trying to achieve a knowledge of sort of the logical workings of language. We're not even really looking for regularity. In fact, what we're expecting is that what we're going to see is some irregularity. So our focus is not so much on the form of language, the logical structuring of language, as much as it is on meaning, the function of language. What is the purpose to which you put language? What do you want it to accomplish? And the basis for how we use language then is choices that we make, meaningful choices. That's what language is. We're choosing how to make meaning, and we make it up very much based on the situation within which we are located and talking about and with whom we are engaged, and that is constantly changing. So Halliday's point is that what we should be looking at is the meaning that there is in language and how we make meaningful choices and the basis for those choices. So you begin with the meaning, and then you take a look at what's the form that is being used to express that meaning. Different set of priorities than linguists like Chomsky, where priority is the form and expecting that there is a regularity and a logic to what you want to describe. Instead, when we come at it from Halliday's point of view, we're interested in first asking that question. What is it that you want to, what's the meaning? And then looking at how the language is used to make that meaning. You begin with a function and look for the form that expresses it. Now, Halliday's point is this, is that within all this variety of ways in which we can use language, what we need is a single methodology, a single approach that we can use no matter whatever kind of text we're working with, whether it be poetry or whether it be the language of science or whether it be political discourse. No matter what, whether it's spoken or written, whether it's communicated within a newspaper or whether it's communicated online in terms of social media, whether you're tweeting or emailing or whatever, right? So Halliday says this: what is important is that we should be able to use the same theory, method of linguistic analysis. We should be able to use, as he describes it, not as linguistics, but grammatics, because he's saying what we're looking at is what is the grammar that provides the means by which we make meaning. And he's saying that we should be able to apply then this approach, whatever kind of text we're trying to interpret, whether it's the poetry of Tennyson, the writings of Darwin, a children's story, Mother Goose, or a scientific magazine, the Scientific American, whatever the text. What Halliday wants to avoid is, as he puts it, an ad hoc, do-it-yourself kit of private commentary. In other words, we don't want to come at a text and say, wow, that's really eloquent, that's really powerful, but not be able to explain why people respond to it that way, why people highly value some ways in which language is used and consider it as inspiration, and others are considered not the proper way to use language and not effective at all. People make judgments about language. So we need to have a way to explain the similarities and differences between texts. How? In terms of how they are valued aesthetically. You know what aesthetic means? I mean, it is the, how creative is it? You take a look at a poem. What is its creativity? How does the poet use the rhythm, the rhyme, all of these aspects of language? Functional value. It serves a purpose. It communicates a message. How effectively does it? The aesthetic and functional values that differentiate one text from another, or one voice from another within the frontiers of the same text. So we begin with the idea that language, yes, is functionally diverse. Different functions, different purposes to which we put language. What are those purposes that we have? Meaning, we say, can break down into different functions: representational, interpersonal, textual. The first one, construing experience, how you understand what's going on around you, how you explain it, what's happening. And that's how you're going to talk about it. So it is the idea. And so we're going to call it the ideational. Also, we are enacting a relationship. You are not just, you're communicating, yes, what's inside you, but at the same time, you're also expressing a relationship through your use of language with the person with whom you are communicating. And that is the interpersonal. Finally, we have a way to, there is a purpose to which we put language, and that is the making of the text itself, the making of the discourse, the creation of the discourse. Call that the textual. The ideational, the interpersonal, the textual. And Halliday calls these the three metafunctions. Overall, the purposes to which we put language, and it doesn't matter what language. Every language needs to serve these purposes, and that is to construe experience, how you reflect on your experience, how you enact social relationships, how you relate to others, how you express your attitude, your perspective on what it is you're talking about. And finally, how that meaning is going to materialize into the text itself, how you organize it, how you show the flow of information, of your ideas as they proceed, as one reads or listens to what is being spoken or written. Now, you said that Halliday wanted to, though, look at it from the standpoint of meaning first, and then how there is a form that language takes, grammar, wording, that expresses that meaning. So we looked at this already. I earlier on, if you remember, we talked about experiential meaning and how you reflect on the world. I mean, how do you reflect on the world? How do you explain something that's happening? Well, you first of all have to have sort of a, what is the nature of the happening, the process, the verb. In English, we represent processes through verbs. Besides that, you also probably have some person who initiated that process and someone who may be affected by that process, and perhaps some circumstances of what happened. What did we broke it down into three things. Remember? Process, participant, circumstance. Now, we said that those process types, though, can be distinguished. There are different kinds of processes. There's doing, there's mental processes, knowing, seeing, feeling. There's verbal processes, behavioral processes, existential, there are, and finally, relational, the verb to be, the verb to have, indicating possession. All right, so we have different process types. We have different roles then that the participants fill. You have the actor who's doing the process, and that process extends to the goal, the affected. In a mental process, you have a sensor and what is sensed, the phenomena that's sensed. We generalized it a bit further. Remember, we've done this with the poetry as well for when we looked at Ruqayya Hassan's, remember the widower? She broke it down into who is in the ER role, who's in the ED role, who is the initiator, who's the affected, whether it be doing, sensing, saying, and so on. So we said that we have these various process types. And we looked at it in the context of a speech, remember, from Donald Jung. And we broke it down into, remember, we broke it down into these three types: sensing, being, doing. And what we discovered was that there was, in fact, something quite interesting about his use of language, the way he sees the world. So that the doing is largely being done by not people, but by things, abstractions, institutions, events, and so on. Then we compared that with another speaker, Susan Rice, and a commencement speech that she gave at Stanford. And there we did the same thing. We compared it, and we did it with the idea of looking at comparing how does she represent who's in the ER role, who's the initiator. And what we found was nearly 80% of the doing being done by I, you, and we are people. Half of her speech was about doing, and 80% of it was being done by people. We are the initiators. And in fact, we are the initiators when it comes to almost 70% of all the various process types. And so we compared them. Now, the point was that the insight that we got comparing Donald Jung and Susan Rice, that came from being able to look at language in terms of the experiential meaning, specifically in terms of choices that were made from the grammar. What am I saying from the grammar? From the wording. What process types were chosen? Who were the participants? Who was the initiator? Who was the affected? By looking at it from that standpoint, and that's what Halliday means by grammar. What's the wording that carries the meaning? And the wording is what we mean by the grammar. And the grammar is that there are different process types, and there are different, in terms of what's going on, you have process, and you have participants, and you have circumstances. Now, it gave us a revealing look at, in terms of comparing the way that these two speakers looked at the world. Now, let's continue this discussion and go beyond this kind of example to look at other aspects of language. The logical, the interpersonal, the textual, and how these also are contributing to how one makes meaning. So I'm going to move on to the logical. Now, this is sort of still under the representational, still under the ideational. The idea being that sort of how do you sort of link up? When Halliday talks about the logical, he's talking about what's the relations between the various clauses that make up what you're speaking. Because when we speak, we don't speak in single clauses. We join clauses one after the other. How do we link them up? Well, that also is going to have an impact on the meaning. And here it comes down to what are our main clauses, what are our dependent clauses, how are the clauses combined? Logical. Now here again, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be explaining some linguistic concepts, but in the end, what I'll be doing is illustrating with, in this case, probably some political speeches, how the grammar itself sort of plays a role, just like we did with comparing Donald Jung and Susan Rice. Now here I said the focus is on the logical. What do we mean by the logical and how clauses are combined? So one is a rather symmetrical, sort of balanced way of joining ideas. We call it parataxis. John enjoys reading and he likes swimming. And so you're just basically extending through joining one clause and another. And in a sequence, John enjoys reading. 1 + 2, he likes swimming. Both sides are balanced. Both sides are grammatically equal. That's not the case in this slide, as you can see, and this is what we call hypotaxis. This is my father. That's the main clause. I've indicated it here in two ways. One with this vertical line and the alpha, the Greek symbol alpha. This is my father. And that I'm saying is the main clause. And who is teaching here is the beta clause. It cannot stand by itself. It depends on the main clause. And so the logical relation here is not symmetrical anymore. You have one that is more the focus, the main idea, and something which is sort of elaborating on that idea. And I'm going to indicate that sort of relationship with this arc pointing from the beta clause to the alpha clause. One further point, and that is we would call this a non-restrictive relative clause. So here a little bit of linguistic jargon, all right? Non-restrictive relative clause. Perhaps you've come across it before when you studied grammar in secondary school or so forth, all right? Non-restrictive relative clause, what does it mean? It means it's just adding information. It's just elaborating. It's not a post-modifier of father. It's not, you typically have one father, all right? So it's not like deciding which father. Now that would be the case in this example. This is my brother. Now you could have more than one brother, but you'll notice I put a comma there after this is my brother, comma. Now the comma, in fact, the punctuation is quite important. And what it indicates is that this also is a non-restrictive relative clause. In fact, in this case, I should have put a comma after my father. But here I really need to distinguish it because whereas the first one, you might not have even considered the possibility I have another father, this one, you might maybe consider the idea that I have another brother. So in this case, this is my brother, comma, who is studying here. How many brothers do I have? This is my brother who is studying here. One brother. You, just like one father, and you are elaborating and giving some information about, in this case, your one brother. How do I know that? Well, because I'm just giving you some additional information about my brother. I'm not defining, restricting the set of which brother I'm talking about. To do that would entail something that removing the comma. And if I remove the comma, then I would have a restrictive relative clause, and I would call that rank shifting. For now, focus on these two concepts: parataxis, hypotaxis. Symmetrical, joining, balanced. Asymmetrical, one being more prominent, one nuclear, one more the main clause, and the other the dependent. All right? Let's take an example. The example I'm going to take is a speech that was given by Barack Obama. In fact, it was a speech that was considered one of his most eloquent. What I'm interested in looking at this speech for is to see the use of sort of the logical kind of structuring, and that identifying in this speech that there is really a very clearly designed progression, logical progression. And that logical progression throughout this, what we're going to be taking a look is the closing. In fact, this speech was set to music. Yeah, will.i.am, the Black Eyed Peas, he put together a music video that was based on this speech. So what was there about the speech that made it so that it could be set to music? It had to have a rhythm. Okay. What I'm going to be focusing on, and I want you to be paying attention to, is the last sentence of his speech. Now, I won't start with that. I'll start a little bit earlier on with the speech, and we'll get to that point. So when we get at the end of the speech, it'll be this clause 47. You'll notice that the sentence is extremely long. All of that complexity here, how does it sort of, wouldn't that be difficult to process? Wouldn't it be difficult to understand? But instead, people responded to it positively, responded to it as being eloquent.
We know the battle ahead will be long, but always remember that no matter what obstacles stand in our way, nothing can stand in the way of the power of millions of voices calling for change. We have been told we cannot do this by a chorus of cynics, and they will only grow louder and more dissonant in the weeks and months to come. We've been asked to pause for a reality check. We've been warned against offering the people of this nation false hope. But in the unlikely story that is America, there has never been anything false about hope. For when we have faced down impossible odds, when we've been told we're not ready, or that we shouldn't try, or that we can't, generations of Americans have responded with a simple creed that sums up the spirit of a people. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. It was a creed written into the founding documents that declared the destiny of a nation. Yes, we can. It was whispered by slaves and abolitionists as they blazed the trail toward freedom. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
It was sung
by immigrants as they struck out to the shores, pioneers who pushed westward against unforgiving wilderness.
Oh,
Yes, we can.
yes, we can.
It was the call of workers organized, women who reached for the ballots, a president who chose the moon as our new frontier,
And the king who took us to the mountaintop
and
and pointed the way to the promised land.
Yes, we can to justice and
Yes, we
equality.
can.
Yes, we can to opportunity and prosperity. Yes, we can heal this nation. Yes, we can repair this world. Yes, we can. And so tomorrow, as we take the campaign south and west, as we learn that the struggles of the textile workers in Spartanburg are not so different than the plight of the dishwasher in Las Vegas, that the hopes of the little girl who goes to the crumbling school in Dillon are the same as the dreams of the boy who learns on the streets of LA.
We will remember that there's something happening in America.
That we are not as divided as our politics suggest. That we are one people. We are one nation. And together we will begin the next great chapter in the American story with three words that will ring from coast to coast, from sea to shining sea. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Thank you, New Hampshire. Thank you.
All right, now take a look at that concluding sentence. Again, as we said, it's very complicated, but what gives it a sense that you can follow it. It does seem to be quite logically put together. So what is that logic? Well, there's a bit of pairing of items as we take, as we learn, that the struggles, that the hopes, we will remember that there is something, that we are not as divided, that we are one people. Three things. And together we will begin. We have two. We will. Now, we can map this out. Look at it like this. We have, remember the sort of way of notation that I've used before. As we take, as we learn. That's paratactic. They're equal. There's a pairing there. And then we have that the struggles, that the hopes. Yes, that's what we learn, all right? So it is, but again, it's another pair there. Now, all of that is sort of prefacing to preceding what follows, the main clause. And you'll notice the music comes in at this point. We have, we will remember, we will begin, again, the pair. And then we have this repetition that there is something, that we are not as divided. And then a pair, that we are one people, that we are one nation. This idea of symmetry and pairing things, and the arrangement of it is quite, the logic of it is very paratactic. And so, in fact, even though it's a very complicated sentence, the complication arises out of a patterning. that we can follow. And we hear that patterning, and as we learn, that the struggles, that the hopes. And so it almost continues to have a kind of rhythm. We will remember, we will begin. That gives it a sense of rhythm that lent itself then to come across and be turned into a music video and to be set to music. Just like you have rhythm in music, just like you have the means in music to carry the tune forward, you're doing something similar in language. And where does it come from? It comes from that logical function of language. We'll take a break now. It's about 12:50, and when we come back, there's some interesting sort of background to who writes his speeches, who writes Obama's speeches. And we're going to take a look at one of the speechwriters for President Obama. His name is Jon Favreau. He's quite well known as a speechwriter. Young, yes, but already quite well known in that particular role. And so we're going to listen to a bit of what he has to say about what it was like to be a speechwriter for Obama. We'll do that when we come back from the break. Let's take a break now and see you at the top of the hour. Okay, continuing then, and where we left off, again, this is Jon Favreau. He's giving a speech about his practice of writing speeches for, in this case, U.S. President Obama. Let's listen.
And then John Kerry lost. And I was crushed. I was 23 years old, but I became desperately cynical about politics and what it could do. I wanted to give it all up, and at that point I sort of had to because I was completely broke. So broke that when I drove home to Boston to move back in with my parents, I didn't have enough money to pay the last toll on the highway and had to speed right through the light. So that was rock bottom. Then a couple of weeks later, I received an email that changed my life. One of my bosses from the Kerry campaign was now a top aide to Senator Barack Obama and told me that he was looking to hire his very first speechwriter. My interview with Obama was surprisingly easy. We talked about our families and where we grew up. We talked about why we got into politics. But most of all, we didn't talk about the line that I took out of his convention speech because he didn't remember it was me. And at the end of the conversation, he said something I'll never forget. He said, "Well, I still don't think I need a speechwriter, but you seem nice enough, so let's give this a shot." And that's how I got the job. So, for 8 years, I had the chance to learn about writing from one of the very best. I can still remember the night I left the office to write my very first Obama speech. He yelled after me, "Favs, I know it's your first speech, and I know you're probably worried, and I know you're probably anxious. But know this, I'm a writer too. Sometimes the muse strikes, sometimes it doesn't. Things don't work out, come in tomorrow, and the two of us will work through it together." And that's how he was for 8 years. The president taught me more than I could have ever imagined about writing and storytelling. He taught me that crafting a simple, logical argument was more important than a snappy slogan or a catchy applause line. He taught me that shorter is always better, reminding me more than once that Abraham Lincoln fit the Gettysburg Address on the back of a napkin. He taught me the value of honesty and authenticity in writing. After delivering one of the most candid, heartfelt, politically risky speeches on race in America, he said to me, "I don't know if you can get elected president saying the things I did about race today. But I also know that I don't deserve to be president if I don't say the things that I believe." But I think the most important lesson that I learned from President Obama was about the power of storytelling to instill a sense of hope and why that's so important right now. We live in very cynical times. And that's partly because we are constantly being fed a steady stream of bad news. Scan the headlines on any given day, and you're bound to see story after story about a problem that can't be solved, a war that won't end, a disease we can't cure, a plane we can't find, a politician, a celebrity, or CEO who has lied or cheated or let us down in any number of ways. These stories are real, mostly, and the media keeps feeding us these headlines because we click on them. But as a consequence, we don't get enough good news. We don't hear as much about the hundreds of millions around the world who've been lifted from extreme poverty since the turn of the century. We don't hear about declining crime rates, or reduction in HIV infections, or the billions who've gained access to clean water and basic sanitation thanks to the generosity and commitment of the global community. It doesn't make the front pages when someone's life is saved because she finally could afford health insurance for the first time, or when a poor child escapes a bad neighborhood thanks to a dedicated teacher. The news will record every instance of a public figure's mistakes, but it cannot possibly capture the daily, countless examples of ordinary men and women who show kindness to a stranger, or forgiveness when wronged, or love without condition. And the news simply does not have the capacity to fully chronicle the slow, painful, and often frustrating pace that real peace and progress has always required. That's why we need storytelling that instills a sense of hope. And that's a job for the world's writers and poets, for its artists and dreamers, for its students and activists and youthful idealists of every age. The people of Ireland understand this better than most. Despite a long legacy of hardship and adversity, or more likely because of it, this small island has produced an incredible number of history's greatest storytellers who are today celebrated as some of your greatest heroes. Joyce, Beckett, Swift, Shaw, Wilde, Yeats, Haney, and of course those courageous Irish monks who rescued our civilization stories from the Dark Ages. Like these proud ancestors and so many other graduates of UCD, I know that many of you will go on to make an indelible impact on our world. And the best advice I can give you is this: whatever change you want to bring about, whatever career you want to pursue, whatever cause you want to champion, don't let anyone else's cynicism be your excuse for not trying. After that disappointing election in 2004, I can still remember the moment when I finally let go of that cynicism. It was the night of the 2008 election, but it wasn't when they called the race for Barack Obama. It was before that, as I was making final edits to the victory speech. The draft ended with a story we found about a woman from Atlanta, Georgia, named Ann Nixon Cooper, who had waited in line for 3 hours that day to cast her ballot. And what made the story so special was that Ann Nixon Cooper was 106 years old, born at a time when she wasn't allowed to vote for two reasons: because she was a woman and because she was African American. So we ended the speech by tracing all the seemingly impossible change she had witnessed over the course of her life: civil rights, voting rights, workers' rights, women's rights. Now, as they started calling the states on election night, someone pointed out to me that we should probably contact Ann Nixon Cooper and find out if she's okay with Barack Obama telling her story. So our campaign researchers dig up her number, and I give her a call. And I tell this frail, 106-year-old woman that a man who's about to become the first African-American president of the United States wanted to mention her in his victory speech. And she paused for a while, and then she said, "Will it be on television?" And I told her, yes, it would be on television. And then she thought about that for a while, and she asked me, "Which channel will it be on?" And I said, "All the channels." And then she said, "I'm so proud of him, and I'm so proud of us." And she started to cry. And at that point, so did I. And right at that moment, they called Ohio, the race was over, everyone started cheering, and I hid under my desk so I could talk to Ann Nixon Cooper for a few more minutes. Seamus Haney once said, "If you have the words, there's always a chance that you'll find the way." On their own, hopeful stories and writing that inspires can't solve the world's problems or shield us from the hardship and heartache that's just part of life. But by reminding us of the progress we've made in the past and the possibilities that exist in the future, words can guide us, push us forward, and at the very least, encourage us to try. Thank you very much for this honor, and I'm very happy to take your questions.
That's the true genius of America, that America can change. Our union can be perfected. What we've already achieved gives us hope for what we can and must achieve tomorrow. This election had many firsts and many stories that will be told for generations, but one that's on my mind tonight is about a woman who cast her ballot in Atlanta. She is a lot like the millions of others who stood in line to make their voice heard in this election, except for one thing. Ann Nixon Cooper is 106 years old. She was born just a generation past slavery, a time when there were no cars on the road or planes in the sky, when someone like her couldn't vote for two reasons: because she was a woman and because of the color of her skin. And tonight, I think about all that she's seen throughout her century in America: the heartache and the hope, the struggle and the progress, the times we were told that we can't, and the people who pressed on with that American creed: yes, we can. At a time when women's voices were silenced and their hopes dismissed, she lived to see them stand up and speak out and reach for the ballot: yes, we can. When there was despair in the Dust Bowl and depression across the land, she saw a nation conquer fear itself with a new deal, new jobs, a new sense of common purpose: yes, we can. When the bombs fell on our harbor and tyranny threatened the world, she was there to witness a generation rise to greatness and a democracy was saved: yes, we can. She was there for the buses in Montgomery, the hoses in Birmingham, a bridge in Selma, and a preacher from Atlanta who told the people that we shall overcome: yes, we can. A man touched down on the moon. A wall came down in Berlin. A world was connected by our own science and imagination. And this year, in this election, she touched her finger to a screen and cast her vote. Because after 106 years in America, through the best of times and the darkest of hours, she knows how America can change. Yes, we can. America, we have come so far. We have seen so much, but there's so much more to do. So tonight, let us ask ourselves, if our children should live to see the next century, if my daughters should be so lucky to live as long as Ann Nixon Cooper, what change will they see? What progress will we have made? This is our chance to answer that call. This is our moment. This is our time to put our people back to work and open doors of opportunity for our kids, to restore prosperity and promote the cause of peace, to reclaim the American dream and reaffirm that fundamental truth that out of many we are one, that while we breathe, we hope, and where we are met with cynicism and doubt and those who tell us that we can't, we will respond with that timeless creed that sums up the spirit of a people: yes, we can. Thank you. God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.
I wonder if you noticed that at the end of the speech, his voice begins to get louder, the tempo begins to increase, pick up. Now, what was it that was sort of helping to make that possible? And I would say that in large measure, in similar to the other speech that we just listened to, it's that last sentence. And again, the use of these sort of logical connections that out of it creates that rhythm, that again, that almost like music that continues to be able to drive it forward. And you almost begin to hear a beat. Now, let's take a look at more about this particular, the ending of this particular speech. This is the speech that
This is
John
our
Favreau was
chance to
talking
answer
about.
that call.
Now, I want you
This
to
is our
listen
moment. This
as
is
he
our
goes through it.
time
And listen to
to
this
put
last
our
sentence.
people back to work and open doors of opportunity for our kids, to restore prosperity and promote the cause of peace, to reclaim the American dream and reaffirm that fundamental truth that out of many we are one, that while we breathe, we hope, and where we are met with cynicism and doubt and those who tell us that we can't, we will respond with that timeless creed that sums up the spirit of a people. Yes, we can. Thank you. God bless you. And may God bless the United States of America.
Now, did you notice that at the end of the speech, it builds as I just described for you, and it proceeds with that sort of beat, because he's got that, all of that. Let me get back the beginning here. This is our moment, he says. This is our time. And then notice B and C, to put our people back to work and open doors of opportunity for our kids. The and there, it joins the two. So you have, again, a paratactic pairing. Again, similar structure, to restore prosperity and promote the cause of peace. Again, repeated 3 times. So 3 times, 1, 2, 3. And then it continues again, another sort of triplet where we have that out of many we are one, that while we breathe, we hope, and where we are met with cynicism and doubt and those who tell us that we can't, we will respond with that timeless creed that sums up the spirit of a people. It proceeds. You notice you almost have 3 pairing, 1, 2, 3, and then 3 more, 1, 2, 3. Where is that coming from? That's coming from the logical structuring, the way this is put together, in this case, the parataxis. So what we've seen so far is the ideational, the experiential, and the logical. And we can see that these do play a role in terms of how we respond, how effective it is. You can see the response of people. People are moved. People are excited. A lot of it, yes, has to do with the circumstances within which the speech is given. But at the same time, the speech itself is also a means by which people are moved. Let's go on to interpersonal meaning. Now, when we talk about interpersonal meaning, what are we talking about? Yes, you can talk about words that are used that are positive or negative in connotation. To unite people is positive, to divide people is negative. So you can sort of communicate attitude, and you can get people responding as this is positive, this is negative. There's more to it than that, though, in terms of how we engage with other people. I want you to think about the exchange that takes place. Very often what we're doing is we're exchanging, well, information. We make a statement. But I can also demand information. I can make a question and expect you to give to me, and I will receive. I can give goods and services. What does that mean? That means that I can make an offer. Would you like tea? I can demand goods and services. I can demand someone do something. It's not information now. It's somebody doing something. I can request, please turn on the air conditioner. Or make it more forceful, turn on the air conditioner. So there are ways that we can engage so that we are engaged in an exchange of information, exchange of goods and services. We are the givers or we are the receivers. Now, how do we get that across in language? Well, of course, we can do so through, in English at least, through two aspects of grammar: the grammatical subject and the finite verb. The finite verb is what expresses primary tense. Now, it is the positioning of these two and their presence or absence which is going to indicate whether I am giving information, making a statement, or demanding information, or giving goods and services, or demanding goods and services. Think about it. John bought bread. Subject, John bought. The finite verb, John bought bread. That's a statement. You have the subject followed by the finite verb. All right. Turn it into a question. Take the finite element, did John. Move the finite and the subject. Turn them around. Now the finite's first, and then the subject. You have a question. Buy bread. There is no finite verb. There is no grammatical subject. They both are absent. And so in English, Halliday calls that the mood element, the subject and the finite. It does define our roles with respect to whether we are giving or receiving, demanding or requesting. But there's more to interpersonal meaning than the words we use, positive or negative connotation. There's more to it than whether we're defining our role in terms of giving information with a declarative or demanding information with an interrogative, a question. We also communicate attitude. There's an element of attitude when we speak. We call that modality. How does modality figure into the interpersonal exchange? Again, I'm going to use an extract from a speech by Obama. And this was when he was president, and he was speaking to Congress. Now, when Obama was president, he didn't have a very happy relationship with Congress. And so in this speech, I want you to notice what is his attitude? What is his relationship with the people to whom he is speaking? This is going to be the text. We'll listen to it in a minute. And if I take a look at it and I identify the modality, the use of modal auxiliaries, you should pass this. You obligated. Should be nothing. Probability. At the end, you should pass. He begins, you should pass, telling who he's speaking to, this is, you are obligated. You should do this. Now, I want you to notice when you listen to it, notice the way he looks. Notice the gestures that coincide with language. But there's also will repeated, will be, will, repeated so many times. What does will convey? Certainty, confidence.
I am sending this Congress a plan that you should pass right away. It's called the American Jobs Act. There should be nothing controversial about this piece of legislation. Everything in here is the kind of proposal that's been supported by both Democrats and Republicans, including many who sit here tonight. And everything in this bill will be paid for. Everything. The purpose of the American Jobs Act is simple: to put more people back to work and more money in the pockets of those who are working. It will create more jobs for construction workers, more jobs for teachers, more jobs for veterans, and more jobs for long-term unemployed. It will provide a tax break for companies who hire new workers, and it will cut payroll taxes in half for every working American and every small business. It will provide a jolt to an economy that has stalled and give companies confidence that if they invest and if they hire, there will be customers for their products and services. You should pass this jobs plan right away.
All right. Now, we've been looking at interpersonal meaning, ideational meaning. The third one, textual meaning. How does the text come to be organized? And here again, what role does it play in contributing to the response that people have toward a particular use of language, expression of language? Now, textual meaning, in textual meaning, there is a particular sort of structure. We call it theme structure. So my question is, what is theme? Now, this will be theme not in the literary sense, not as we saw, for example, when we talked about poetry with Professor Ruqaiya Hassan, and she talks about theme, the motif, the hypothesis about some aspect of the life of social man. That's not what theme is here. Here, Halliday is using theme in a different sense. It is the starting, it is the departure point of the message. It is what the speaker wants to talk about. It orients the clause within the context of what else has been said. Finally, it relates to the method of development of the text. It seems like theme does a lot. So what does it mean it's the starting, it's the departure point of the message? It means it's how you are going to begin. And when we talk about a message, what we mean is the clauses that make up the text. Each clause is a message. When you begin, what do you begin with? Typically, what you begin with is what you want to talk about. And typically also, it's something that is already known to your listener. It's old information. It's already known. You're going to put the new information later. It also, the choices that you make from one clause to the next, for how you begin, that's going to signal how that text is put together. So what we're talking about now is textual meaning, that third meta-function. You'll notice it says here how meaning materializes, choosing the starting point of the message. Theme. So what is theme? We're going to distinguish between two concepts here. One is theme and the other is focus. Theme. It's the initial grammatical element. When I say it's the starting point of the message, the starting point of the clause, it's a grammatical element. And what's a grammatical element? The subject, the verb, complement. It's not the first word, all right? It's the first grammatical element. Focus. Well, in English, we don't use tone on each, like in Chinese, but we do have intonation. And intonation is significant in terms of meaning. It conveys, we can put the focus on giving a certain what's called tonic prominence, meaning the tone stands out. How does it do that? Well, typically when we're talking, when we come to the end of a clause, the intonation rises and then falls. There's a peak and then a drop off. And where that peak and drop off occur is indicating to your listener the focus, typically the new information. Let's take some examples. John's already left. John is the grammatical subject. John's already left. Left. Left is the new information. It's the focus. Now, it doesn't have to be the grammatical subject. It could be like yesterday. That would be like the circumstances. Now, you'll notice something. John is, yes, the grammatical subject. John is also a participant, right? Yesterday is a circumstance. So these are experiential elements that are theme. These are expressing some aspect of what it is we're talking about. Process. It could be a process, could be participant, could be a circumstance. His spirit, they could not kill. I can, that's the compliment. I can put that at the front. I can even have a very lengthy grammatical subject, which even itself embeds a clause within it as a post modifier, people who live in glass houses. Now, as I said just a moment ago, when I put in new, I said new information, I said is what? It has sort of a tonic prominence. You can hear it in terms of the intonation. Now I'm going to play the extract. I've played it before for you of Donald Jung speaking, but this time, I want you to be paying attention to his intonation. And I want you to notice what I put in sort of the last column here, news, and I put it in blue. And I want you to pay attention. Sometimes it'll be very clear, the intonation pattern. Okay, so listen and see if you can, and hear him signaling to you what is the focus, what is the new information.
Some of you may know that this year is also an important anniversary for China. It is the 100th anniversary of the revolution that overthrew the Qing dynasty and ended millennium of dynastic rule. 100 years ago today, Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the man most closely associated with that event, was making his way back home to China from the United States. He had been here in the US trying to raise funds for the further attempts to revolt in southern China. He was in Denver when the news reached him that the revolution had started without him on the 10th of October in Wuhan, a city in a conservative center of China. At one level, you can read that as a lesson on the need for humility, that those who seek to lead events must accept that often the events leads them. And at another level, it's a reminder of the power of ideas to move men to action well beyond the reach of those who had the ideas.
Now, could you hear it? So that in Denver leads them, the event leads them, must accept. So you hear the rise, that rise in the intonation is signaling to you, the listener, new information, focus. And then sometimes it's stands out very obviously. Now, in this particular example here, if I said, but Mary, I do love your cooking. Okay, if I said the first experiential element, now remember, what was the first experiential element? Process, participant, circumstance. But at the beginning here, I have a few things going on. I have But, Mary, I do love your cooking. Now, what would be the first experiential element? If I go through this, but is not the first experiential element, is it? It's not a process, a participant, or a circumstance. It, in fact, is purely textual. It indicates some kind of relationship between what is being said now with what was said previously. So it is theme, it is at the beginning, but it is textual in nature. Mary. Now, is Mary a participant? No, in fact, she's the person you're speaking to, but she's not something that this is about. It is but Mary. Mary here is a term of address. I'm talking to Mary. I'm not talking about Mary. Mary is not a participant here. The use here is what we call evocative. It is interpersonal. And so I have textual meaning, but I have interpersonal meaning, Mary. Neither of these is an experiential element. Neither of these is what I'm talking about. Neither of these is a process, a participant, or a circumstance. That experiential element is the grammatical subject, I. It is the ideational theme. Notice the three metafunctions here. All are playing a role at the beginning of the message. The textual theme is relating with what was said before. The interpersonal theme is relating with whom I'm speaking. And finally, I'm saying what I want to say. I do love your cooking. So what we put at the beginning of the message has meaning, has significance, and it's a choice that you're making. Now, some things we put at theme have a very special meaning. I don't know if you realize that. When I say, for example, it's John I want, what does that mean? Does it have any special meaning? We call it a special thematic structure, a predication. But what does it mean? For example, if I said, I want John, now what would be theme? Theme would be I, and John would be probably the new information, the focus. I want John. Now, why then do I say it's John I want? Well, because I want you to know that it's not who you were thinking of. In other words, when I say it's John I want, it is as though you have the idea that it's someone else. Bob or Tom or whatever, all right? And I'm saying to you, it's John. I'm putting it at the beginning, but I'm signaling that it is the pronounced as with new information. It's John I want. I'm telling you very clearly, this is the new information. It's not what you were thinking. Identification is a different kind of structure. Here, if I say I need a new car, okay, fine. I can maybe need something else too. But when I say what I need is a new car, in other words, the grammatical subject is a clause, what I need. We call it a nominalization. We've packaged all the elements of a clause. I need what? All of that into the grammatical subject slot. We've produced like what would be comparable to a noun phrase. We call it a nominalization. We put that at the beginning, followed by the verb to be. And the verb to be is almost like an equal sign. And what does it say? It says exclusively, this and this alone. When I say I need a new car, that's one thing. But when I say what I need is a new car, that means I'm saying to the listener, this and this alone. I don't need anything else. Exclusively this and this alone. Okay, so there's different kinds of meaning that are there in terms of the choices that I make about how I begin the message. All right, so that's one thing. That's one message. But we don't speak in isolated messages, do we? We string our messages along, we string the clauses along, and that is what makes up the text, what we're saying. And so it does matter then the choices that I make from one message to the next. So for example, there's three kinds of possible choices in terms of linking clause after clause after clause. And this will be important to signaling to my listener or even my reader the flow of information. Let's take a linear thematic progression first. That's the first one that's mentioned here. It says new information becomes the old information. Okay, now, where is the new information? Typically, we said toward the end of the clause, typically receiving tonic prominence. In other words, we do signal new information by intonation and location. All right, now here, the genesis of the City Polytechnic of Hong Kong lay in the report of a committee. Now, that report of a committee, this report, that's the new information. That's the new information. That's the focus. Now look at how the next sentence begins. That's sentence one. Sentence two. The new information, once I've said it, it becomes old. It's been said. You know it. It's been given to you. And that new information now, where does it go? It goes at the beginning of the next sentence. What I do is, what's linear thematic progression is how you end one clause. The new information is then repeated at the next, in the next clause at the beginning, because it now, so we have the way we signal the flow of information is new becomes old, and so on. Look at two. In this report of June 1981, it recommended what? That there should be a general provision in the substantial increase in the provision of places for tertiary education. And then this new information in 2B becomes the old information. One of the measures recommended for achieving this. What's this? This is what you just said. This is linear thematic progression, a flow where how you end one is how you begin the next. Now, English language speakers, readers, process language this way. We listen for it. We look for it in what we're reading. We're expecting the flow of information. We're expecting that maybe what you just told me is new information is what's going to be carry on to be talked about further in the next clause. All right, let me take this example from a scientific journal. I've highlighted in this, at the beginning, in blue, I've highlighted the new information in 1A, extending their ranges toward the poles. 1B, earlier in the spring than previously. So 1A, 1B, I've highlighted the new information. And what happens in the next sentence? These range expansions, that was from 1A. And changes in the timing of seasonal events, that's from 1B. These are recaptured. What was new information in those previous clauses, in that previous sentence. That previous sentence had two clauses. The new information from both is both repackaged then as the grammatical subject, theme of the next sentence. Again, I've highlighted it here, the different colors to illustrate it. Extending their ranges toward the poles, 1A, and then in 2 begins these range expansion. And 1B is about earlier in the spring than previously, timing of seasonal events. Notice the focus. It's not necessarily repeating the same words, it's the same concept. And it can be said in different words. Well, that's linear thematic progression. Now let me talk about another kind, continuous. If you are writing a text that compares two things, compares and contrast kind of text, typically you will probably notice a continuous thematic progression. So for example, here, the writer is comparing two dictionaries. The two are the Collins-Coburn English Dictionary, the Longman Dictionary of Contemporary English. Those are the two dictionaries, all right? That's the new information, right? Now, in the second sentence, both. Well, that's linear thematic progression. But from there on, from second sentence onward, notice both, they, both, neither, both. You keep repeating the same thing as theme. And there's a continuity there, right? That continuity is being expressed through starting every sentence with what it is you're comparing and contrasting. And the nature of the contrast, the nature of the comparison is your new information. Continuous thematic progression. All right, now, let me take a speech. I'm not going to play it for you, but I want you to notice this was a speech that was given by Malala, and when she was giving a speech at the United Nations. And I want you to notice something. Paragraph 13. She begins, dear friends. Now, that's rather an interpersonal theme. Notice the Taliban, they, the terrorists, they. That's continuous thematic progression. The next paragraph, dear sisters and brothers. Again, she begins with an interpersonal theme. Notice, again, we notice a continuous thematic progression. I. On to the next paragraph, I. And then it shifts subsequently to this. In other words, we notice in Malala's speech quite a lot of continuous thematic progression. Now, what I did was I did a word cloud of the choices of theme. In order to sort of narrow it down, I took the top 10 ideational themes. In other words, that where it was a first experiential element, first participant. I'm including the pronouns. The speech itself, I believe, is like 32 paragraphs. The first 15 paragraphs, notice, in terms of the top 10 topical themes, what stands out here? I. She kept repeating, I, kept repeating first person throughout the whole first half of the speech. From paragraph 16 through 34, same thing, top 10 topical themes. Notice now, I is real small and we. Both uppercase and lowercase we. Do you notice the shift? How, remember we said that theme is also about the method of development of the text. Here, the theme very clearly shows the first half is about her first person experience. And from paragraph 16 onwards for the second half, it is largely her engaging with her audience, making that connection with her audience. So the first part, first person, second half. So clearly, this must have been by design. So that for the first half, signaled how? I. It's how she begins these clauses. But then shifts to we. It does indicate the method of development, how that text was developed, how it was put together. We call it its rhetorical structure. All right, I'm going to show you an interesting sort of comparison of two texts. Both are grammatical, and I'm going to do this when we come back from the break. We're going to take a look and see how important is theme, how significant. And I think you'll see that the choices that you make for theme can make the difference between a coherent text and a comical text. Okay, so let's take a break and come back again at the top of the hour. All right, 2 o'clock. See you then. Okay, let's come back to this example. I want to illustrate how theme is important. All right. What I've been trying to do today with you has been to go through the three meta functions that Halliday identifies, noticing how those meta functions are realized through the choices that we make in wording do have a role to play in how people respond. Well, the question can be asked is it just the language that people are responding to? No. People are responding. Sorry. Just a moment. Sorry about that. There was some feedback. I don't know if you could hear it. There was some feedback from the other computer I was using. All right. Okay, so my point was, go back to a question that was raised by one of your classmates, and that is, does other aspects, cultural, political, social, also fit into how we respond? And I will be talking, perhaps we'll get to some of it today, about Trump's speech, for example, and how people responded to Trump's speech. It's been fascinating to me to see how after Obama's eloquence, Trump's speech was very different. And yet it also was, for some, quite attractive. Some people responded quite positively. Other people responded quite negatively. Are there clues for why that's the case in his language? Yes. To say that we are looking at it from a linguistic perspective is not to say that other factors don't matter, but it is to say that linguistic factors do matter, and they do play a role. And identifying those can give us some insight into how and why people respond the way they do. All right, now come back here. Let's look at this example. If I take the two, and as I go through it, we'll see which version is better, all right? For example, in version 1, the sun's shining. That's quite all right, quite normal. But version 2, it's the sun that's shining. I remember what we said about that kind of predicated theme predication. It's the sun that's shining, implying what? That whoever's reading this or hearing this might have been thinking it was something else that was shining. So you remember predication. Remember our example, it's John I want. And an interesting part of that is John, that predication. You'll notice that it's basically creating a clause so that the new information, not what the listener or reader might have been expecting, is put at the beginning. Yes, it's still theme, but it's also still obviously not the old information. You're putting it in a clause. It's John. You're almost artificially creating a clause with a dummy subject, it, just so that what you want to have there at theme position is nonetheless still in where you would normally expect the focus to be at the end of a clause. It's John. It's the sun. Okay, now as I go through this, for your use later on when you go through the slides, I will have some sort of descriptions here in the boxes. I'm not going to be reading those. I will leave those for you to read later. I will be more or less talking as we go through it, our way through it, rather than reading to you off of the boxes. All right, those are for you to look at later, so that as you go through it now, if it isn't clear, you can go back later and see a further description. All right. Next, here come the astronauts. They're just passing the Great Hall. Oh, that looks like a linear thematic progression. Here come the astronauts. They're just passing the Great Hall in version 1. Version 2, the astronauts come here. The Great Hall, they're just passing. Now, in fact, here is not the Great Hall, but the way it is worded here, the astronauts come here. Here would be probably receiving the focus, considered new information, and the expectation would be, this is like a radio announcer, all right? The expectation of the audience would be that here is going to be picked up as theme in the next clause, which it is not. Here is not the Great Hall. It's another place you're talking about. The Great Hall, they're just passing. Here again, I'm going to skip the boxes. Going on. Perhaps the president will come out to greet them. Now, I'm looking at version 1. Perhaps the president will come out to greet them. Okay, you're sort of, whoever is speaking planted the idea in whoever's listening's mind that it will be the president, right? And you go on, no, it's the admiral who's taking the ceremony. You're contradicting what you just had said. Purposefully, you're identifying that it's not who you thought. Perhaps you said the president will come out to greet them. It's not. No, it's the admiral. So here, predication is being used correctly because you already planted the idea that it was the president. It's not. And so you're making the point it's the admiral. That's the correct use of predication. But in version 2, we have he'll perhaps come out to greet them, the president. No, it's the ceremony that the admiral's taking. Now that gets confusing. Version 2. You've already talked about he'll perhaps come out to greet them, the president, and then you say, no, it's the ceremony. You've been talking about the president. And now, no, it's the ceremony that the admiral's taking. You see the shift? So the listener is going to be quite off track. You gave the idea of president, and you're talking about the president, and then, no, it's the ceremony. The shift in the topic, the shift in the theme doesn't connect. Okay, back to version 1. No, it's the admiral who's taking the ceremony. He has great dignity, the admiral. He's shaking hands with him now. A continuous thematic progression. Quite all right. What about version 2? No, it's the ceremony that the admiral's taking. The admiral has great dignity. What he's shaking with him now is hands. What does it mean? What he's shaking with him now is hands. We put that nominalization there. We said that it is to indicate exclusively this and this alone. What he's shaking with them now is hands. What else could he have been shaking with them? And then notice how it goes on. Okay, I'll have to leave the box there. Why there are only 2 of them puzzles me. Well, you've been talking about what he's shaking with him now is hands. And then why is there only 2 of them? Well, the new information was hands. And then why there are only 2 of them? What's them? Hands? In other words, what we're beginning to see that the way the choices of theme can lead to a very, in some cases, almost comical reading of interpretation of what's going on. What he's shaking with him now is hands. Why there are only 2 of them puzzles me. Completely incoherent, even laughable. Okay, back to version 1, the space doctor. I can't see anywhere. It was the space doctor who aroused most of the excitement. Must be him. Okay, again, we keep putting the space doctor there in theme position, rather a continuity. Whereas in version 2, the 2 Navy men are in view. Anywhere I can't see the space doctor. What the space doctor aroused was most of the excitement. With all these cheers, the crowd must be welcoming him now. A sort of a hodgepodge of theme choices. There's no either linear or continuous progression. What we see in version 1 is a very coherent, where theme is being used strategically to guide the reader through understanding what the text is about and through the flow of information. In version 2, that is all jumbled up. And it's jumbled up by the fact that we are jumbling up the choices of theme. Theme itself is playing an important role in either whether the text is coherent or incoherent. All right, now let me illustrate something else with theme. And again, I'm going to be doing it with Obama. And this goes back to Obama and Romney. This was in 2012 when both of them were running for the presidency. Romney lost and Obama won, but these were the debates that took place prior to the election. What I'm going to do is we're going to try to take a look and see how people responded and whether there is in fact something going on here with respect to language in terms of why people responded the way they do. We have 3 debates. The first debate, they were standing at the podium. The second presidential debate was a different format, town hall format. And the third presidential debate, more like the first, more like a debate, but they were both seated. All right, so let's take a look. First debate, how did people respond? These are polls that were done after the debate. CBS, CNN, Gallup, these are famous for the polling that they do. And in this case, 22% said Obama won, 46% Romney won, 32% no opinion. CNN, 25 to 67. Gallup poll, 20 to 72. Joe Klein from Time magazine said this: it was in fact one of the most inept performances I've ever seen by a sitting president. What was so bad about it? What did Obama do wrong? That's the response, right? I mean, why did Obama seem to have such a, why was he responded to rather negatively? And Romney did so much better.
That brings
Here's
us
the
to
first.
closing statement.
This is the closing.
There's a coin toss. Governor Romney, you won the toss and you elected to go last, so you have a closing 2 minutes, Mr. President.
Well, Jim, I want to thank you, and I want to thank Governor Romney, because I think this was a terrific debate, and I very much appreciate it. And I want to thank the University of Denver. You know, 4 years ago, we were going through a major crisis, and yet my faith and confidence in the American future is undiminished. And the reason is because of its people. Because the woman I met in North Carolina who decided at 55 to go back to school because she wanted to inspire her daughter and now has a job from that new training that she's gotten. Because a company in Minnesota who was willing to give up salaries and perks for their executives to make sure that they didn't lay off workers during a recession. The auto workers that you meet in Toledo or Detroit take such pride in building the best cars in the world, not just because of paycheck, but because it gives them that sense of pride that they're helping to build America. And so the question now is, how do we build on those strengths? And everything that I've tried to do, and everything that I'm now proposing for the next 4 years in terms of improving our education system or developing American energy, or making sure that we're closing loopholes for companies that are shipping jobs overseas and focusing on small businesses and companies that are creating jobs here in the United States, or closing our deficit in a responsible, balanced way that allows us to invest in our future. All those things are designed to make sure that the American people, their genius, their grit, their determination is channeled, and they have an opportunity to succeed. And everybody's getting a fair shot, and everybody's getting a fair share. Everybody's doing a fair share, and everybody's playing by the same rules. You know, 4 years ago, I said that I'm not a perfect man and I wouldn't be a perfect president, and that's probably a promise that Governor Romney thinks I've kept. But I also promised that I'd fight every single day on behalf of the American people, and the middle class, and all those who are striving to get in the middle class. I've kept that promise, and if you'll vote for me, then I promise I'll fight just as hard in a second term.
Governor Romney, your 2 minutes.
Okay, now that was the closing, all right? It's not the whole debate, but it does give us some clues, some indication. The third presidential debate, Obama did way better. 53% in the CBS poll to 23%. 48, not that much, but it is better than before in the CNN poll. So Obama did better in the third presidential debate. So what did he do differently?
Mr. President.
Well, thank you very much, Bob, Governor Romney, and to Lynn University. You've now heard 3 debates, months of campaigning, and way too many TV commercials. And now you've got a choice. Over the last 4 years, we've made real progress digging our way out of policies that gave us 2 prolonged wars, record deficits, and the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. And Governor Romney wants to take us back to those policies. Foreign policy that's wrong and reckless, economic policies that won't create jobs, won't reduce our deficit, but will make sure that folks at the very top don't have to play by the same rules that you do. And I've got a different vision for America. I want to build on our strengths. And I've put forward a plan to make sure that we're bringing manufacturing jobs back to our shores.
by rewarding companies and small businesses that are investing here, not overseas. I want to make sure we've got the best education system in the world, and we're retaining our workers for the jobs of tomorrow. I want to control our own energy by developing oil and natural gas, but also the energy sources of the future. Yes, I want to reduce our deficit by cutting spending that we don't need, but also by asking the wealthy to do a little bit more so that we can invest in things like research and technology that are the key to a 21st century economy. As Commander-in-Chief, I will maintain the strongest military in the world, keep faith with our troops, and go after those who would do us harm. But after a decade of war, I think we all recognize we got to do some nation building here at home, rebuilding our roads, our bridges, and especially caring for our veterans who sacrificed so much for our freedom. You know, we've been through tough times, but we always bounce back because of our character, because we pull together. And if I have the privilege of being your president for another 4 years, I promise you I will always listen to your voices, I will fight for your families, and I will work every single day to make sure that America continues to be the greatest nation on earth. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Bob, Mr. President.
Okay, now let me take a look at the choices of theme. In the closing statements, the first debate is at the top here. And you'll see there's quite a range of references here. Stands out, okay. American, you can see a number of other words there as well. But you'll notice in the third debate, something is different. What do you notice? I is still there. Fewer other words are mentioned, but also what stands out is we. Not there in the first debate, but much more prominently in the third debate. Well, let me do some counting here then, all right? So I'm comparing Obama in the first debate and with his performance in the third debate. So let's look at just at Obama first of all right? In terms of we, as we just mentioned, 0 in the first debate. 67% of themes were other mentions, not I, we, or you. All right, other things. In the first debate in the third debate for Obama, notice that other things mentioned drops to 23%. Instead, we have a much greater number of we. Almost balanced, in fact, I and we. So it was more, could we say that in a way it was first person, singular and plural, and that was about I and we. It was not about these other things. What he's talking about and what he's doing, he's making that connection with his audience. And he's doing so by his choice of theme. Now, notice in Romney, for example, and I'm just looking at his third debate performance to compare with Obama's, he also uses we a number of times, and he also uses I, all right? So the point I'm making is that if you take a look at the text itself, you'll notice that, and this is the first debate, the choices of theme. And you notice in the last column, it's topical, it's the ideational theme. So we have so many. 4 years ago, my faith, confidence, future, the reason, the woman, the company, the auto workers, a paycheck, everybody. Notice that there's no reference to I or we. It's all about other things and quite a range of things. So it was quite diffuse, we could say. It was quite spread out over a number of different references to other things. And only toward the end of that first debate closing did it become down to I. But it was all about I. The you is rarely mentioned, all right? We have, you know, that's repeated, all right, you know, but which is more like a discourse device to indicate changing in the topic. All right, what about the third debate? In the third debate performance, notice in the choice of theme, many fewer other items, right? It's I or we, I or we. It is simply about himself. He's asking you to vote for him, to choose him. He's talking about himself, but he's also talking about we, and making that connection. And I believe he's making that connection through his choices of theme. That is, it's about us, about the connection that he's making between himself and his audience. But there's something else going on. The question is asked, what about, are there other things besides language? I want you to notice something. And I'm going to play it, and I want you to notice Obama's eyes. In the first debate, do you see it? He never looks at the camera, very rarely, always looking off. There's no connection made with the audience. The bottom, he never takes his eyes off the camera, off the audience. He makes that connection. He's making that connection through his eyes, the eye contact, but it is also being made language in terms of his choices of theme, by the choices that he's making of first person, singular and plural, the I and the we. He's making that connection with his audience. And theme is playing a role in that. All right. I was going to go on to something related to the language of science. I'll come back to that next week. But I thought I'd instead maybe be interesting sticking on the idea of political discourse and take a look at Trump's speech. I mean, we have two quite contrasting political figures here, Obama and Trump. The issue that was often raised was, does Trump speak presidentially? And what does that mean, to speak presidentially or not? Well, come to the debates. The debate between Trump and his opponent, who became president. Here's sort of some highlights from that debate.
We welcome the Republican nominee, President Trump, and the Democratic nominee, Vice President Biden.
How you doing, man? How are you? I'm well. I beat Bernie Sanders.
Not by much.
I beat him a whole hell of a lot. I'm here standing facing you, buddy.
Pocahontas would have left 2 days early. You would have lost every primary.
All he knows how to do is
Super Tuesday. You got very lucky.
Here's the deal. I got very lucky. I'm going to get very lucky tonight as well. And tonight I'm going to make sure, because here's the deal. Here's the deal. The fact is that everything he's saying so far is simply a lie. I'm not here to call out his lies. Everybody knows he's a liar.
But you
I just want to make sure.
Joe, you're the liar.
I want to make sure.
You graduated last in your class, not first in your class.
I want to make sure.
Mr. President, can you let him finish, sir?
No, he doesn't know how to do that. He has,
You'd be surprised.
You picked
You'd be surprised.
the wrong guy, the wrong night at the wrong time.
Listen, you agreed with
Here's the
Bernie
deal.
Sanders to the
The
manifesto.
whole idea.
Let him.
There is no manifesto, number
Please
one.
let him speak, Mr.
Number
President.
two.
You just lost the left.
Number two.
You just lost the left. You agreed with Bernie Sanders on a plan.
Folks,
absolutely
folks,
agreed
do you have
to,
any
and under that
idea
plan,
what
you have
this clown's
socialized,
doing?
They call it
Mr.
Do you have any do?
socialized medicine.
Mr. President.
Let people know
He doesn't want
you're a
to answer the
senator.
question.
I'm not going to answer the question
Why
because
wouldn't you answer that
because
question?
the question is
radical left.
Will you shut up, man?
Listen, who is on your list, Joe?
This
Who's
is
on your
so
list?
Right. Gentlemen, I think
This
we've
is
ended
so
this.
He's going to pack the court.
We have
I'm not going to give a list.
We have ended this segment. We're going to move on to.
A lot of people died, and a lot more are going to die unless he gets a lot smarter, a lot quicker.
Mr. President?
Did you use the word smart? So you said you went to Delaware State, but you forgot the name of your college. You didn't go to Delaware State. You graduated either the lowest or almost the lowest in your class. Don't ever use the word smart with me. Don't ever use that word.
Oh, give me a break.
Because you know what? There's nothing smart about you, Joe. 47 years you've done nothing.
Let's have this debate.
And if you
We'll
would
see
have
who's
had, let me just tell you something, Joe.
No,
if you would have had the charge of what I was put through, I had to close the greatest economy in the history of our country. And by the way, now it's being built again.
See,
And
he's
we're going to
going
get
up
to the
fast.
economy in the next segment, sir.
Okay.
Oh, Mr. President,
Go ahead.
I'm asking you a question. Will you tell us how much you paid in federal income taxes in 2016 and 2017?
Millions of dollars.
You paid millions of dollars?
Millions of dollars.
So
yes.
not 750?
Millions of dollars. And you'll get to see it.
He says he's smart because he can take advantage of the tax code. And he does take advantage of the tax code. That's why I'm going to eliminate the Trump tax cuts. And
Well, why didn't you do it over the last 25 years?
Because you weren't
Why didn't you
president.
do it over
Because
the
you
last
weren't
25
president
years?
screwing
No,
things
no.
up.
You were a senator. And
You're
by
the
way,
worst
you were a
president
vice-
America has ever had.
Hey,
Come
Joe,
on.
let me just tell you, Joe. I've done more in 47 months. I've done more than you've done in 47 years, Joe.
Will you urge your supporters to stay calm during this extended period, not to engage in any civil unrest? And will you pledge tonight that you will not declare victory until the election has been independently certified? President Trump, you go first.
I'm urging my supporters to go into the polls and watch very carefully, because that's what has to happen. I am urging them to do it. As you know, today there was a big problem. In Philadelphia, they went in to watch. They were called poll watchers, a very safe, very nice thing. They were thrown out. They weren't allowed to watch. You know why? Because bad things happen in Philadelphia, bad things. And I am urging my people. I hope it's going to be a fair election. If it's a fair election, I am 100% on board. But if I see tens of thousands of ballots being manipulated, I can't go along with that. And I'll tell you what,
does that
from
mean,
a common sense,
does that mean you're going to tell your people to take to the
street? It means you have a fraudulent election. You're sending out 80 million ballots. They're not equipped to. These people aren't equipped to handle it. Number one. Number two, they cheat. They cheat. Hey, they found ballots in a waste paper basket 3 days ago, and they all had the name military ballots. They were military. They all had the name Trump on them.
Vice President
you think
Biden,
that's good?
Vice President Biden, final question for you. Will you urge your supporters to stay calm while the vote is counted, and will you pledge not to declare victory until the election is independently certified?
Yes, and here's the deal. We count the ballots, as you pointed out. Some of these ballots in some states can't even be opened until Election Day. And if there's thousands of ballots, it's going to take time to do it. And by the way, our military, they've been voting by ballots since at the end of the Civil War, in effect. And that's what's going to happen. Why was it not? Why is it for them somehow not fraudulent? It's the same process. It's honest. No one has established at all that there is fraud related to mail-in ballots.
Are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland?
Sure,
Are you
I'm willing
prepared
to do
specifically
that, but
do it?
Well, go ahead, sir.
I would say almost everything I see is from the left wing, not from the right wing.
So what are you saying?
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it.
You want to call them? What do you want to call them? Give me a name. Give me a
White
name.
supremacists and
Who would
white
you like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud
militia.
Boys, stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left, because this is not a right-wing problem. This is a left-wing.
FBI director
This is a left-wing problem.
White supremacists. Antifa's an idea, not an organization.
Oh, you got to be
not
kidding.
militia. That's what his
It's an idea.
FBI his
Okay.
FBI director
Gentlemen,
said.
well, thank you and good night.
Wow, that was exhausting. There's so much that goes on there. You know, very early on when Trump was beginning to run for president, Yahoo News put up what they put up as 5 rules of how to talk like Trump. And I think we saw quite a bit of it in this debate performance. Rule number 1, interrupt yourself a lot, as well as interrupt the other speaker. Repeat yourself repeatedly. Use intensifiers like very, very, very often. Speak in slang, big league. Issue commands, believe me. Now that only touches the surface and in a way meant to be lighthearted, but it is true there is a great deal of difference between Trump's speech and the typical speech of those who are involved in political discourse. George Lakoff from UC Berkeley, he said this: the thing about being a New Yorker, well, Trump is a New Yorker, is that it is polite if you finish their sentences for them. It's a natural part of conversation. Trump knows his audience can finish his sentences for him. In other words, they leave gaps in what they say. In another, this was in a paper, Donald Trump's unique speaking style explained by linguists. The writer says this: watching Trump, it's easy to see how this plays out. He makes vague implications with a raised eyebrow or shrug, allowing his audience to reach their own conclusions. And that conversational style can be effective. It's more intimate than scripted speech. People walk away from Trump feeling as though he was casually talking to them, allowing them to finish his thoughts. She continues, Lakoff has an explanation for why Trump's style speaking is so appealing to many. Many of Trump's most famous catchphrases are actually versions of time-tested speech mechanisms that salespeople use. They're powerful because they help shape our unconscious. Okay, so Trump speaking is very different than, as I said, other politicians, other people engaged in typical political kind of discourse. But I wanted to compare and see what is the difference in terms of Trump speaking. And so I'm taking 2 examples of him speaking. One is him speaking to Congress, and the other is him speaking at CIA headquarters. And this was at the beginning of his presidency. Now, what is the difference in the way that he speaks? The first example we're going to take a look at is him speaking to Congress. When he gave this first speech to Congress, given the way he typically talks, Time magazine said this: for the first time in his presidency, Donald Trump acted the part. For once, that message bucked his bombastic instincts and channeled the aspirational aims of conventional predecessors. Trump hewed closely to his prepared text, which he was spotted practicing in his armored limousine on the drive to the Capitol. What thrilled Republicans most about Tuesday's address was how conventional it was. Donald Trump did indeed become presidential tonight, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell told CNN after it was over, in tones that were uncharacteristically excited as Trump's speech was muted. Had Trump finally learned how to talk presidential? He even looked the part. You can see the difference between his usual red tie and the more, what should we say, conservative look that he presented that night. So In other words, we see two different sides, two different ways of speaking.
Each American generation passes the torch of truth, liberty, and justice in an unbroken chain all the way down to the present. That torch is now in our hands, and we will use it to light up the world. I am here tonight to deliver a message of unity and strength, and it is a message deeply delivered from my heart. A new chapter of American greatness is now beginning. A new national pride is sweeping across our nation, and a new surge of optimism is placing impossible dreams firmly within our grasp. What we are witnessing today is the renewal of the American spirit. Our allies will find that America is once again ready to lead. All the nations of the world, friend or foe, will find that America is strong, America is proud, and America is free.
Hey, take a look at that text. It's a script. I mean, he's reading. Very different than his usual speaking, which is unscripted. There are these elements that we can see here. It passes the torch of truth, liberty, justice. And notice how that is picked up in the next sentence. What do we call that? We call that linear thematic progression. There's the repetition of things in threes, not unlike what we've seen in Obama's speaking. A new chapter, a new national pride, a new surge of optimism. America's strong, America's proud, America's free. So the typical features of what we would expect in a kind of discourse that sounds, well, to many people's ears, presidential. Well, then Trump went to speak at CIA headquarters.
And I was explaining about the numbers. We did a thing yesterday, the speech. Did everybody like the speech? You had to like it. So I've been given good news, but we had a massive field of people. You saw that, packed. I get up this morning, I turn on one of the networks, and they show an empty field. I said, wait a minute, I made a speech. I looked out. The field it looked like 1 million and a half people. They showed a field where there were practically nobody standing there. And they said, Donald Trump did not draw well. I said, it was almost raining. The rain should have scared him away, but God looked down and he said, we're not going to let it rain on your speech. In fact, when I first started, I said, oh no. First line, got hit by a couple of drops. And I said, oh, this is too bad, but we'll go right through it. But the truth is that it stopped immediately. It was amazing. And then it became really sunny. Then I walked off and it poured right after I left. It poured. But, you know, we have something that's amazing because it looked like 1.5 million people, whatever it was. But it went all the way back to the Washington Monument. And I turn on, and by mistake, I get this network. And it showed an empty field. And it said we drew 250,000 people. Now, that's not bad, but it's a lie. We had 250,000 people literally around, in the little bowl that we constructed. That was 250,000 people. The rest of the, 20-block area all the way back to the Washington Monument was packed. So we caught them. And we caught them in a beauty. And I think they're going to pay a big price. We had another one yesterday, which was interesting. In the Oval Office, there's a beautiful statue of Dr. Martin Luther King.
All right, now, Trump, when asked later about this speech, that he gave at CIA headquarters, he said this.
I gave a speech that really was a 10, relatively speaking. I had a standing ovation like you wouldn't believe, everybody. And it was such a success. Okay, so now I see CNN and other people say, well, who was in the audience from Trump? Trump. I went there with a few people. I paid great homage to the wall with the stars. I paid great homage. And the audience was standing ovation. They were standing from the beginning. They didn't even sit down. It was one standing ovation, the whole thing.
You know what a standing ovation is, right? He doesn't. A standing ovation is when people are seated and then they stand up. Not you walk into a place and everyone's standing and that's a standing ovation. But that matter aside, one last clip before I close it off for today. I'm going to come back to this and compare what is there about Trump's speech. More than just those 5 rules from Yahoo News. Let's take an analysis and let's really look at his speech compared to the speech of presidents, the speech of other politicians. This last clip is Wall Street Journal reporter commenting about that same speech at CIA headquarters.
My problem with his appearance there was that he just rambled. It was like a campaign appearance. You know, it was, you should have seen our crowds, and he attacked the media, and he said, I was on the cover of Time magazine 14 or 15 times. Who cares?
Yeah, who cares?
Again, you know, it's, you know.
It has to make you wonder who's handling him in the White House.
Well, he can't be handled.
If anybody.
But he ought to, but somebody should write maybe 5 minutes of remarks that say, CIA, here's why I value you. Here's your role. Here's why I'm going to support you. End of story. Move on.
Move on. Great advice. Paul Gigot, thanks very much.
That's what we're going to do. We're going to move on. And we'll come back to next week. We'll begin here with Trump. And I want to compare him with his speeches. And I'm going to be comparing him with Obama and Nixon, and taking a look at some of the assumptions that people have about his speech and seeing are they true or not. And we'll take a look at Trump's speech. It is surprising how appealing his way of speaking has been. It's almost been the exact opposite of Obama's eloquence. And in some respects, perhaps that's what people were responding to, the ineloquent. So let's talk more about that next week. And next week, I also will be going through with you, reviewing in preparation for your midterm test, week 8. Please remember, and you do have another assignment. If I just can remind you quickly, be sure to finish your second continuous participation task, all right? And then the midterm, which we'll talk more in detail about and review for you next week. Please do take a look at these questions and begin to give thought to what you have in your previous lecture notes along similar lines, all right? So it will be, by the way, it will be, as I said, open book. It will be on Canvas. You will receive it at noon. You will have to submit on Canvas, via Canvas, by 3 p.m. So let's talk more about that next time. For the time being, we'll say goodbye. All right. See you next week.